Okay, so welcome back to this next video in which we are discussing 5-HT3 receptors. Okay, so we've now discussed that 5-HT3 receptors fall into the nicotine-like receptor family of ligand-gated ion channels, also called the cis-loop ligand-gated ion channels. So let's just remind ourselves of what this means. This means that all 5-HT3 receptors are pentameric. Okay, so I'll draw a picture here. So here is our 5-HT3 receptor. Okay, here is the pore that goes down the middle, and it's sitting in the phospholipid bilayer, and it's made up of 5 separate protein subunits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like so. Okay, then if we pull out one of these subunits of a 5-HT3 receptor, okay, we've discussed that what we will find is a membrane-spanning topology that looks like so. Okay, so once again, let's just copy this picture out. We've got our amino terminus here, like so. Then we've got this cis-loop structure extracellularly. Okay, so this loop in the polypeptide structure that is held together by a disulfide bond between 2 cysteine residues. Then we've got our first membrane-spanning alpha helix known as TM1. We've got our second membrane-spanning alpha helix known as TM2. Our third membrane-spanning alpha helix known as TM3. This intracellular loop between TM3 and TM4. And then our TM4 and then our carboxylic acid terminus over here. Okay, so this is the structure of a 5-HT3 receptor subunit. Now, I said that there was not just one 5-HT3 receptor, that it was an entire family, okay? And that is because there is not just one 5-HT3 receptor subunit, okay? There are multiple. So the really simple thing would be if there was just one 5-HT3 receptor subunit. Then you made this 3 times, this certain protein with this membrane-spanning topology, you made it 5 times. I apologize, I said 3 before. You make it 5 times, you join 5 of them together, and then you get your full 5-HT3 receptor. But that would only give us one 5-HT3 receptor, so it can't be that way. Instead, you have multiple 5-HT3 receptor subunits, okay? And 5 5-HT3 receptor subunits are known. So we have 5 genes which all have slightly different sequences of organic bases, which therefore produce proteins which have slightly different sequences of amino acids. However, they all fold into the same sort of membrane-spanning topology, and they can all pentamerize together to make a 5-HT3 receptor. Okay, right, so these 5 genes are called 5-HT3A. Okay, that's the first one. Then we have 5-HT3B. Okay, and then we go on. So we have 5-HT3C, 5-HT3D. Okay. Whoops, what have I done here? No, this is going wrong. I'm getting confused. Right, so cross that out. 5-HT3C. Okay, that's the third one. Then we have 5-HT3D. And then finally, 5-HT3E. So these are the 5 different subunits that you can use to build a 5-HT3 receptor. Now, as of yet, these bottom 3, the 5-HT3C, the 5-HT3D, and the 5-HT3E subunits, we have not found them actually expressed, I don't believe. We found their genes, but I don't think we found any sort of function for them yet, i.e. we haven't actually found them in functional 5-HT3 receptors, but they do exist, at least as genes. Okay, so the important two are the 5-HT3A subunit and the 5-HT3B subunit. And now the question arises, how can these join together to make a pentamer? Well, one of the pentamers that you find, okay, and there's only 2 known actual 5-HT3 receptors, okay, there is the 5-HT3A homopentamer, okay, and what that means is that you make 5 copies of the 5-HT3A protein. You bind all of these together to make a full pentamer, and this then is your 5-HT3 receptor. Okay, so there is the 5-HT3A homopentamer, And then you can also find pentamers which consist of multiple different types of subunits. Now I've said the only ones that have been found to actually be found in 5-HT3 receptors are the 5-HT3A and the 5-HT3B, so it must be a heteropentamer of these two. So we have also found 5-HT3 receptors, which are pentamers of both 5-HT3A subunits and 5-HT3B subunits. Okay, and these are called 5-HT3A, 5-HT3B heteropentamers. So hetero means different, pentamer means that you have 5 subunits. So these 5-HT3 receptors will have both 5-HT3A proteins within them and also some 5-HT3B proteins within them. Now, as far as I'm aware, the stoichiometry is not known, okay? And what I mean by that is we don't know whether you put in one 5-HT3A subunit and then 4 5-HT3B subunits, or 2 5-HT3A subunits and 3 5-HT3B subunits, or so on. And we certainly don't know how you arrange them relative to one another when you're actually joining them together. That sort of detail isn't known. What we do know is that you can find 5-HT3 receptors which have both 5-HT3A subunits in and 5-HT3B subunits in, and those are called the 5-HT3A, 5-HT3B heteropentamers. Right, okay, so those are the two different 5-HT3 receptors that are actually known. Okay, and that's it. Even though we've got these 5 different genes that are known, those are the only 2 types of 5-HT3 receptor that are actually known to exist. Okay, right. So now let's discuss when they open, because serotonin is binding. So what will happen is 5 serotonin molecules will come and bind, one to each of the 5 subunits, and this will trigger the ligand-gated ion channel to open. What do they actually allow to move through them? What are they actually permeable to? Well, basically, you find that they are permeable to both sodium ions and potassium ions. And we now want to discuss what effect is this overall going to have on the electrical potential difference across the cell membrane when we open this channel, basically. What effect is it going to have? Okay, so here is our pentamer here, and let's say the serotonin has come in and bound, and that's caused the ligand-gated ion channel to open, and now it's permeable to both sodium and potassium. So we need to think about which direction sodium and potassium are going to move in. Now, to understand this, we need to look not only at the concentration gradients of sodium across the cell membrane, but also the electrical gradient across the cell membrane. So I just want to discuss with you what the electrical gradient across the cell membrane means, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So, electrical potential then is this thing from physics, okay? It is a mathematical model to help us understand this reality. Okay, and this is the mathematical model. What you do is you go to every point in 3-dimensional space. So I'm trying to do my best to draw a 3-dimensional graph here. And you ascribe it a real number. And this real number is going to be the electrical potential at that point. Okay, so to every single point in real 3-dimensional space, you are going to ascribe a real number. Now, this real number can be positive, it can be 0, it can be negative. Okay, it can be an integer, it can be a rational, it can be an irrational, any real number. Okay, you're not allowed to go beyond the real numbers. You're not allowed to use the bigger number system of the complex numbers. You have to stay within the real numbers. Okay, so you give every point in 3-dimensional space this symbol. Okay, now the units of electrical potential then are volts. Okay, now let's go away from the abstract physics and let's go to cells. Okay, so we have our cell here. Now basically, all of the points inside the cell, okay, so all of the points that are in the cytoplasm of the cell, these are all going to be in electrical equilibrium with one another and are all actually going to have the same electrical potential. So all of these points in orange are all going to have the same electrical potential. Okay, so let's call this the electrical potential, capital E for electrical potential, R subscript I for intracellularly. So what this means is that if I had a little man here with a clever machine which can measure the electrical potential, and he was to move anywhere within this intracellular compartment, so he's moving around the intracellular compartment, he can go anywhere, okay, the number that this screen shows him would always be the same, okay, and it would be the electrical potential intracellularly. So the machine would always read this number wherever he went within the intracellular compartment. Okay, right. Meanwhile, the extracellular fluid is also in electrical equilibrium. Okay, so all of the points of the extracellular fluid, they're all going to have the same electrical potential. And we'll call this the electrical potential, capital E, and we'll subscript it E for extracellular. Okay, so what this means is that if this little man was to walk around in the extracellular fluid, the number on his screen would always remain the same, and the number it would have is this electrical potential extracellularly here. Okay, so these two numbers are not necessarily the same thing. Okay, the intracellular electrical potential might be different from the extracellular electrical potential. So this gives us the concept of an electrical potential difference across the cell membrane. Now, electrical potential difference is also called voltage. Okay, now strictly speaking, when you talk about an electrical potential difference across a cell membrane or a voltage across a cell membrane, you should give it a direction. You should, strictly speaking, say from extracellular to intracellular. However, people will often just omit the from extracellular to intracellular because they assume that you realize that. Okay? Whenever anyone talks about the electrical potential difference across the cell membrane, they absolutely always mean from extracellular to intracellular and never from intracellular to extracellular. Okay? But just to keep everything clear, I will make that plainly obvious. So, what does this mean then? This means if you move from extracellular to intracellular, how much does the electrical potential change? Okay, or putting it even more transparently, if the little man starts off extracellularly and he has his machine on, the machine will show him this number here. If he now moves into the intracellular compartment, the number on his screen will change. It will change to this number. How much has the number changed from him moving from extracellular to intracellular? That is what is meant by the electrical potential difference across the cell membrane from extracellular to intracellular. So let's see if we can write this down in terms of the electrical potential intracellularly and the electrical potential extracellularly. So we want how much does the number on his machine change when he moves from extracellular to intracellular. So that's going to be the number after the move, okay, which is the electrical potential intracellularly. So that's the final number on his machine. And then subtract the initial number on his screen, which is the electrical potential extracellularly. Okay, so that is what is meant by the electrical potential difference across the cell membrane. How much the electrical potential changes if you move into the cell. Now, usually this is kept at a value of around negative 65 millivolts. So firstly, let me just discuss the fact that the electrical potential difference will have the same units as electrical potential, okay, because we're just taking one electrical potential, the electrical potential intracellularly, and we're subtracting off another electrical potential, the electrical potential extracellularly. So of course the units of that value are still going to be the same as the units here. Okay, a millivolt just means a thousandth of a volt. If you like, you can replace this with negative 0.065 volts. Okay, right. So what this means is that if you move from extracellular to intracellular, the electrical potential will go down. The number on this screen will go down, and it will go down by 65 millivolts. Okay, so the intracellular compartment's electrical potential is lower than the extracellular compartment's electrical potential, and it's lower by 65 millivolts. Okay, right. So let's transfer this onto this picture up here. So we have an electrical potential extracellularly, and then we have an electrical potential intracellularly, and at the moment the intracellular electrical potential is 65 millivolts lower than the extracellular electrical potential. Okay, right. So, let's now put on this picture the concentrations of sodium and potassium on either side of the membrane, because that's also going to be important. Okay, so the sodium concentration extracellularly is around 145 millimolar. Okay, meanwhile the sodium concentration intracellularly is around 12 millimolar. Okay, so that's sodium here. The potassium concentration intracellularly is around 155 millimolar, and the potassium concentration extracellularly is around 4 millimolar. Okay, so if this channel is roughly equally permeable to sodium and potassium ions, we now want to work out which direction are sodium and potassium going to move, and which of those is going to be the more important movement. Okay, so let's start with sodium. The sodium concentration extracellularly is 145 millimolar, whilst it's 12 millimolar intracellularly. That's a 12-fold gradient favouring the movement inwards, okay, simply because a sodium ion is 12 times more likely to hit the channel from the extracellular fluid and go in than it is to hit the channel from the intracellular aspect and go out. Okay, so that's going to favour the movement of sodium in. In addition, there is a general rule in physics that all positively charged particles, which sodium and potassium both are, will prefer to be in the area where the electrical potential is lower. Now, which of these two compartments has the lower electrical potential? It's the intracellular compartment, and it's lower by a whole 65 millivolts. Okay, so the sodium ions are going to want to go into the intracellular compartment. So the electrical gradient and the concentration gradient in the case of sodium are going to work together basically and produce you a very large movement of sodium into the cell basically. Okay, whereas if we consider potassium now, the concentration gradient is around 40-fold, favouring the movement of potassium out. So the concentration gradient says move out. Okay, but then the electrical gradient is negative 65 millivolts. Okay, so the intracellular compartment's electrical potential is 65 millivolts and lower than the extracellular compartment's electrical potential. Potassium does not want to go to an area of higher electrical potential. It wants to stay in the intracellular compartment. Okay, so the electrical gradient says move in, basically. Okay, so now we've got a more difficult conundrum. Which wins, basically, is the question. Does the concentration gradient win, or does the electrical gradient win? Well, this is a 40-fold gradient. The concentration gradient will win. You will get a movement of potassium out, but it will be tiny, okay, because the electrical gradient has weakened it hugely. Okay, but it's not strong enough to completely take it to nilch. Okay, to take it to nothing, what you will need to do is take the electrical potential difference across the cell membrane down to negative 85 millivolts, the Nernst potential for potassium. Okay, so if the intracellular compartment's electrical potential is lower than the extracellular compartment's electrical potential by 85 millivolts, that would be enough to completely stop potassium from moving out. And then if you went below that, if you went down to negative 95 millivolts, let's say, you'd actually reverse it. You'd go in to the cell rather than out of the cell. Okay, that's why this is also known as the reversal potential, because it's the point at which you reverse from moving out to moving in if you go beyond that. Okay, right. So the overall message is that sodium current in is going to be large, potassium current out is going to be small, because the concentration gradient and the electrical gradient are opposing one another. So overall you're going to get a lot of sodium ions moving in and a few potassium ions moving out. That overall means that you've got a net movement of positively charged ions into the cell, because the number of sodium ions moving in is going to be bigger than the number of potassium ions moving out. So overall you're getting positive charge moving into the cell. Okay, so this is what's known as a depolarizing current. Okay, so a current just means a movement of charged particles, which this certainly is. Okay, a depolarizing current means that we're going to depolarize the electrical potential difference of the cell membrane. Now, why is that going to happen? Well, basically, when you move positive charge from the extracellular fluid into the intracellular compartment, it's going to have effects on the electrical potentials intracellularly and extracellularly. Okay, when you dump positive charge into the intracellular fluid, that will raise the electrical potential of the intracellular fluid. Okay, so where positive charge is, that boosts the electrical potential of that area. So we're bringing positive charge into the intracellular compartment, and therefore we're going to boost the electrical potential intracellularly. Meanwhile, we are taking the positive charge from the extracellular fluid. Okay, so we're grabbing positive charge from here and dumping it into here. So that means that the positive charge that was there was initially boosting up this electrical potential extracellularly. But now once we've removed it, the electrical potential extracellularly is going to fall. Okay, so initially, the electrical potential difference across the cell membrane was negative 65 millivolts. Okay, that meant that when we moved from extracellular to intracellular, we went down in electrical potential by 65 millivolts. However, we're now lowering this one and we're moving this one up, so they're moving towards one another. So the amount you're going to have to step down when you move from extracellular to intracellular is going to get less. So the electrical potential difference across the cell membrane is going to become less negative. Okay, and when the electrical potential difference across the cell membrane becomes less negative, that's known as a depolarization of the electrical potential difference across the cell membrane. To see this another way, if we just look at the formula, we're raising the electrical potential intracellularly, we're raising this number, we're lowering this number here, so we're raising this one, we're decreasing the amount we're subtracting off. Of course, this number is going to become now less negative, more positive, basically. Okay, so the overall effect then of opening a 5-HT3 receptor, either of the 5-HT3A homopentamer type or a 5-HT3A, 5-HT3B heteropentamer type, is that you depolarize the electrical potential difference across the cell membrane by allowing this depolarizing current into the cell. Okay, so that concludes our discussion for this video.